Elias had always been an outcast. Born to a mother the village called a witch, he had spent his entire life at the edge of Ravenshire, in a crumbling farmhouse that barely stood against the wind. His mother, frail and sickly, was the only warmth in his cold world. She had raised him alone, teaching him to be kind, to be patient, even when the villagers spat at his feet. The people of Ravenshire whispered whenever he walked past, "That boy's mother should have died long ago. She's a curse upon our land. He's her son. He'll be cursed too. It's best not to deal with him. Why does he even bother keeping her alive? He should just let her rot." They refused to trade with him unless he paid twice the price, mocked him when he tried to sell his crops, and threw stones at his home when the nights were dark. And yet, Elias never fought back, because his mother had taught him one thing above all else. "Be kind, my son, even to those who have no kindness in their hearts. One day, kindness will return to you." And so he endured. He worked the fields alone, toiled under the scorching sun, and spent every coin he earned on herbs and medicine for his mother, even when her sickness worsened, even when her breath grew weaker, her skin colder. Until one day, while gathering firewood deep in the Wailing Marsh, he found something strange. An egg. It was large, smooth, and golden, nestled in a tangle of roots. Unlike anything he had ever seen, warm to the touch, beating faintly like a heart still living, he had never seen a bird lay something so massive. But it looked abandoned just like him. He couldn't leave it. So he took it home. Elias did not know what kind of creature lay inside the egg. At first, he thought it might be a goose or an eagle, something rare. He kept it near the fire, wrapped it in cloth to keep it warm. And he waited. Weeks passed, and then on the coldest night of winter, the egg cracked. At first, there was only a soft tapping, the sound barely audible over the howling wind outside. Then the shell splintered, pieces breaking away like glass. Elias held his breath. What emerged was not a bird, it was a creature of molten gold, small and fragile, its scales gleaming in the dim firelight. It blinked up at him with bright, burning eyes, eyes that looked far too old for something so newly born. A dragon. Elias should have been afraid. But the creature, no, the hatchling, did not snarl, did not claw, did not show teeth. It cooed softly, curling against him as if seeking warmth, as if seeking comfort. And for the first time in his life, Elias felt wanted. He named it Solstice. And from that day on, they were never apart. From the moment Solstice was born, the world changed. The soil, once dry and barren, became rich and fertile. Crops grew taller and fuller, their golden fields stretching toward the horizon. The river, which had once run murky and lifeless, now teemed with fish, clear as glass. The sick, people who had been bedridden for months on the brink of death, woke up, their fevers vanished overnight. And the people of Ravenshire noticed. At first they feared the dragon. A monster, some whispered, a cursed beast. But when their bellies filled, when their children stopped coughing blood, when their livestock grew fat and strong, their whispers changed. Now they called Elias friend. They smiled at him, spoke kindly, offered him food and drink. For the first time, they welcomed him into the village instead of turning him away. Elias wanted to believe them. He wanted to believe that they had changed, that they had finally accepted him. But his mother's voice, weak and frail, still whispered in the back of his mind. "People do not change so easily, my son. Their kindness is for the dragon, not for you." He ignored the warning, and he trusted them. And word of Solstice spread beyond Ravenshire, to the ears of Lord Aldrich of Highcrest, a ruler whose kingdom had been suffering from famine and plague. His knights arrived one evening, armor gleaming, swords sheathed but hands resting on the hilts. Their leader stepped forward, looking down at Elias with cold eyes. "Your dragon has brought prosperity to your land. My lord requests its presence in Highcrest. He will be well compensated." Elias's stomach twisted. "Solstice is not mine to give. He stays where he wishes, and he wishes to stay with my mother." The knight's expression darkened. "Be wise, farmer. This is not a request." Elias stood firm. "Then tell your lord my answer remains the same." The knight's lips curled into a snarl. "Then we will take it." With a single signal, the knights drew their swords. Elias barely had time to react before they charged forward, but then something unexpected happened. The villagers stepped between them. The same people who had once spat at Elias's feet now raised pitchforks, torches, and farming tools, forming a barrier between him and the knights. "You will not take our dragon," they shouted. "Ravenshire will stand against you." Elias was shocked. For the first time in his life, they were protecting him. The knights hesitated. Their numbers were few, and fighting an entire village, even farmers, would lead to unnecessary losses. Their leader gritted his teeth, glaring at Elias. "This is not over. You will regret this." And with that, they turned and rode away, back to High Crest. Elias let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He turned to the villagers, his voice filled with gratitude and disbelief. "You protected us." The village elder smiled warmly, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You are one of us, Elias. Solstice belongs here. We would never let them take your dragon." Elias wanted to believe them, and he did. That night, he slept soundly, thinking for the first time that he had a home. The night was calm. The sky above Ravenshire stretched into endless black, the air thick with the scent of fresh crops and damp earth. Elias had gone to bed for the first time in years, feeling safe. The villagers had stood by him, protecting Solstice from the Lord's knights. For the first time, he believed he belonged. For the first time, he believed the village had changed. He was wrong. The moment he opened the door that morning, he smelled blood. It was faint but undeniable, that thick metallic scent of something warm and fresh. A terrible weight settled in his chest. He stepped inside, and there she was, his mother, lying motionless on the wooden floor, her body sprawled in an unnatural position, her frail hands clutching at her slit throat. A pool of dark crimson surrounded her, staining the floorboards, seeping into the cracks. Elias's breath caught in his throat. "No!" His legs collapsed beneath him. He reached out with trembling fingers, barely able to touch her cold skin. Her eyes, the same eyes that had looked at him with love every day of his life, were now empty, lifeless. And then he saw the message. Carved into the door in rough, jagged strokes were the words, "The Lord sends his regards." Elias's breath turned shallow. His fingers clenched into fists. His body shook. His vision blurred, red consuming the edges of his sight. Behind him, he heard the rustling of wings. Solstice had entered the room. The dragon did not roar, did not snarl, did not bare his fangs. He only lowered his great golden head, pressing his snout to Elias's shoulder, as if he could feel his pain. Elias didn't cry, didn't scream, didn't beg for mercy. He only whispered, and his voice was colder than death itself. "Burn High Crest. Burn it to the ground." The people of High Crest saw the flames before they saw the dragon. A golden shadow blotted out the moon, its great wings casting darkness over the city. Then came the roar. It shook the heavens, splitting the night apart, sending birds screaming from their nests and shattering glass windows. By the time they realized what was happening, it was too late. The first wave of fire consumed the rooftops, igniting the city like a funeral pyre. The second wave melted stone, turning once proud castles into rivers of molten ruin. The third wave devoured flesh. Elias stood at the edge of the inferno, watching as the city burned, watching as the people who had stolen his mother from him screamed. Knights tried to fight. Arrows soared through the sky. They melted before they even reached Solstice. Men raised shields and swords. They turned to charred corpses before they could swing. The city streets became rivers of blackened bodies, the air thick with the scent of burning hair, boiling flesh, melting armor. And Elias did not care. He walked through the flames untouched, stepping over the charred remains of soldiers, nobles, merchants, commoners. None were spared. None deserved to be. And then finally he found Lord Aldrich. The man lay dying beneath a collapsed stone wall, his body crushed, half his face burned beyond recognition. He saw Elias, and then, to Elias's shock, he laughed, a weak, broken, blood-choked laugh. Elias stepped forward, standing over the dying lord. "Do you laugh at your own destruction?" Elias asked, his voice cold as ice. Aldrich spat blood. "You fool." Elias frowned. "You killed my mother, you sent your knights, and for that I took everything from you." The lord's burned lips twisted into a grin. "You really think I killed your mother?" he rasped, voice barely above a whisper. Elias froze. Aldrich coughed violently, blood pooling from his lips. Still his grin widened. "It was Ravenshire." Elias's breath hitched. I offered them gold in exchange for her death and the dragon." The words hit like a blade to the gut. Aldrich's burned eyes, though fading, gleamed with cruel amusement. "They were afraid you'd refuse me again, so they gave me your mother's head on a plate, thinking I'd take the dragon in return." He let out another ragged, dying laugh. "But I don't steal from the dead." His voice was barely a whisper now. "You burned the wrong city, boy." Elias's mind fractured, his vision blurred. His people, the ones who had smiled at him, they had done this? They had sold his mother's life for gold, for a dragon. Aldrich choked on his own blood, then collapsed into flames, his body consumed by the fire. Elias turned away. He had another place to burn. The people of Ravenshire gathered in the town square, waiting for Elias to return. They would greet him with open arms, with smiles and praise, as if they had not carved his mother's throat open. They thought they had won. They thought they had everything. They thought he would never know. Elias stood at the edge of the village, staring at the homes he had once thought of as distant, cruel neighbors. Now, he saw them for what they truly were: liars, betrayers, cowards. The village elder stepped forward, smiling warmly. "The Lord is dead?" he asked eagerly. "You avenged your mother? You did well, Elias. You are one of us now." Elias said nothing. He only watched them. Watched the way some of them smiled too easily, their relief too obvious. Watched the way some of them looked away, their eyes unable to meet his. Watched the guilt in their faces. And then the elder spoke again. "We had no choice, Elias," he said, voice shaking. "You would not give the dragon to the Lord, but if we killed your mother, we knew you would be angry enough to destroy Highcrest. And once the Lord was dead, the dragon would stay with us forever." For a moment, Elias said nothing. His face was unreadable. Then he nodded slowly. "I understand." The elder exhaled in relief. The villagers relaxed. Some clapped Elias on the back, smiling. "We did what we had to do, Elias. We had to protect the village. You understand, right?" "Of course," Elias said, smiling softly. And just like that, the people of Ravenshire celebrated. They brought out food, ale, music. They danced in the streets. They laughed, feasted, and drank deep into the night, thinking all was well, thinking Elias had forgiven them. They sang songs of how they had outwitted a lord, of how Ravenshire had won. They never noticed the way Elias sat in silence, his hands folded neatly, his expression still. Never noticed the way Solstice loomed behind him, golden eyes watching the village with eerie stillness. Never noticed the way the dragon's tail coiled and uncoiled in the dirt, waiting. The first flames came at dawn. Elias stood at the center of the village, his voice calm, quiet. "Burn it." Solstice obeyed. The golden flames spread silently at first, licking up the wooden homes, searing through rooftops. By the time the first villager noticed, it was too late. Then came the screams. "Elias, what are you doing?" The people who had laughed, feasted, and sang the night before now ran through the streets, flames crawling up their backs, melting their skin, devouring their homes. "Elias, please have mercy! We are your people!" Elias watched, and he smiled. "You were never my people." The elder, the one who had confessed everything, fell to his knees, tears streaming down his face. "Elias, I beg you, we did it for the village, we—" The flames engulfed him mid-sentence. By mid-morning, Ravenshire was gone. The golden dragon landed beside Elias, folding its wings, its fire still smouldering in its throat. Elias did not look back. There was nothing left to see. No home, no people, only ash. And finally, he felt peace. He stepped forward, placing a hand on Solstice's massive snout. The dragon purred softly, pressing into his touch. He turned away from the ruins of a village that had never been home. "Come, Solstice," and together they disappeared into the horizon. A kind man who had learned too late that kindness was wasted on the cruel, and a golden dragon who had loved him enough to burn the world.